A bright morning sun touched the tall glass windows of a large corporate building in the city. People walked quickly through the front doors, holding their coffee cups, adjusting their ties, and talking into their phones. It was another busy start to the day. Among the steady stream of workers and visitors, there was a man who didn't seem to belong to this fast-moving crowd. He walked slowly, calmly, and without hurry. He was dressed simply, wearing a plain shirt and trousers that looked neat but ordinary. No expensive watch shined on his wrist, and no designer bag hung from his hand. He carried himself with quiet confidence, but at first glance, many wouldn't notice it. To the passing employees, he looked like an ordinary visitor, perhaps someone who had come to ask for a job or to deliver something. People brushed past him, barely paying attention. Some even looked at him with mild curiosity, wondering what business a man dressed so simply had in a place filled with sharp suits and polished shoes. But this man wasn't offended by the looks or the whispers. Instead, he smiled gently at the receptionist as he walked through the lobby. He didn't announce who he was. He didn't flash any card or demand special treatment. He simply observed. His eyes moved from one corner of the office to another. He noticed how employees spoke to each other, how some were friendly while others seemed stressed. He noticed how managers hurried past their staff without even a greeting. He saw both warmth and coldness in the same building. There was a reason for his quiet visit. He wanted to see the reality of his company when no one knew who he was. Sometimes, the only way to truly understand a place is to step into it not as a leader with power, but as an ordinary person, blending in. That was his plan that morning. As he walked further, a group of junior employees entered behind him. They wore cheap suits, probably new hires. He noticed how the security guard gave them a polite smile but didn't even glance at him. The man chuckled softly to himself. He was not angry. He knew that appearances often create illusions. People quickly form opinions about others just by what they see, not by what is hidden inside. He thought about his own journey. Years ago, he too had walked into buildings dressed in borrowed clothes, carrying nothing but hope in his heart. He remembered the days when he stood outside office doors, nervous and unsure, waiting for someone to believe in him. Those days had been difficult, but they had shaped him into the person he was now. And maybe, just maybe, that's why he chose to come today not as the CEO of the corporation but as a simple man who blended into the crowd. The office atmosphere buzzed with activity. Phones rang, printers hummed, and the tapping of keyboards filled the air. But even in the noise, he felt something missing: kindness. He saw how some employees were quick to ignore those who looked different, how smiles were given only to those in authority or those dressed in style. His heart grew heavy, though his face remained calm. He stopped by a large glass wall where employees gathered near the coffee machine. Some laughed loudly, sharing inside jokes, while one man stood quietly, waiting for his turn. No one paid attention to him. The simple visitor noticed this small scene and thought about how often people are overlooked, just because they don't shine brightly on the outside. He adjusted his shirt, looked around once more, and decided to walk toward one of the inner offices. His steps were unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. A few employees gave him strange looks. One whispered to another, "Maybe he's lost." Another muttered softly, "He doesn't look like he belongs here." These words didn't hurt him, instead, they reminded him why he had come. He wanted to see this truth the way people judged without knowing. Near the corner office, he passed by a young intern who was rushing with a stack of papers. The pile looked heavy, and some sheets slipped from her hands. Without hesitation, the man bent down to help her. The intern blinked in surprise. Usually, no one stopped to help. She smiled gratefully and said, "Thank you, sir." He nodded with warmth and replied softly, "It's no trouble. Take your time. Don't let anyone rush you." His voice carried kindness, and for a moment, The intern felt lighter. She hurried away, glancing back once more at the man, wondering who he really was. The man continued his walk, taking in the details of every corner. On the walls hung framed photos of leaders, awards, and certificates. He recognized some of them, of course, because many had been won during his leadership. Yet no one looking at him could guess he had anything to do with those successes. That was the beauty of staying hidden. Truth revealed itself in pure form. At the far end of the hallway, he stopped for a moment to gaze at a motivational quote painted on the wall: "Respect is not given to titles, it is earned through actions." He smiled faintly at the irony. Respect, he thought, was still given to appearances far too often. As he stood there, he sensed that the real test of the morning was about to begin. For now, he was still invisible, just another ordinary visitor. But invisibility has a strange power: it shows the world's true face. And though no one in that building knew it yet, this simple man was quietly gathering stories, impressions, and truths that would soon surprise them all. The man continued his quiet walk through the long hallways of the corporate building. The polished floors reflected the lights above, and the air smelled of fresh coffee mixed with paper and ink. Every step he took seemed unnoticed, but his eyes were sharp, catching details most people missed. He noticed how some employees walked with confidence, while others moved timidly, almost as if they were afraid of making mistakes. As he reached another corner, he saw a woman standing with her arms crossed, speaking sternly to a young staff member. Her voice was sharp, and her words cut through the air. The staff member nodded nervously, holding onto a file like it was a lifeline. When the staff member left hurriedly, the woman sighed loudly, muttering to herself in frustration. This woman was the floor manager. She looked polished, wearing a stylish suit, and her posture gave away her sense of authority. The man noticed how she glanced at people not with warmth, but with judgment. When she spotted him standing near the hallway, her eyebrows raised slightly. She didn't recognize him, of course. To her, he looked like someone who didn't quite fit in. She walked up to him briskly. "Excuse me," she said, her tone clipped. "Who are you here to see?" The man smiled politely. "I'm just here to observe," he replied softly. Her eyes narrowed. "Observe? This is not a public place. You can't just wander around here. Do you even have an appointment?" He looked at her calmly, his voice gentle. "I believe every workplace tells a story. Sometimes, you don't need an appointment to see how people treat each other." The manager frowned. She didn't like his answer. "Look," she said firmly, "this is a professional environment. If you don't belong here, I suggest you wait outside. We don't have time for interruptions." The man tilted his head slightly, still calm. "What makes you think I don't belong here?" he asked quietly. The manager let out a short laugh, not a friendly one. "Your appearance," she said bluntly. "You're not dressed like someone who works in this building. And frankly, you're standing around as if you're lost." The man did not flinch. He had heard words like this before in his life. But instead of reacting, he simply asked, "Do you always judge people by how they look?" The manager crossed her arms, growing impatient. A few employees nearby stopped to listen, curious about the exchange. Some of them shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. "I don't have time for this," the manager snapped. "If you don't leave, I'll have security escort you out." Her voice was loud enough now for others to hear clearly. The man remained composed, his hands loosely at his side. "I assure you," he said softly, "I am not here to cause trouble. I only wish to understand this place." The manager rolled her eyes. "Understand this place? This is a corporation, not a charity home. People come here to work, not to daydream." Her words carried an edge that made some staff members lower their heads in silence. They knew the side of her well. Many had felt the sting of her harshness before, though none dared to speak against it. The man looked into her eyes, not with anger, but with calm strength. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. His silence made the moment heavier. Feeling challenged, the manager took a step closer. Her voice sharpened. "Listen, if you think you can stand here, wasting my time, you are mistaken. People like you don't last in a place like this. We only keep professionals, not wanderers." The words "people like you" carried a weight, and a few nearby employees looked uncomfortable. They knew she often judged others by how they appeared, but this moment felt different. It was harsher, more public. The man finally spoke again, his tone steady. "Every person deserves respect. Whether they wear a suit or simple clothes, whether they carry power or not." The manager let out a dry laugh. "Respect is earned. And you, sir, haven't earned mine. Now, please step aside before I lose my patience." The room grew quieter. Some employees pretended to focus on their computers, though their ears strained to catch every word. The tension filled the air like a heavy cloud. The man still did not raise his voice. He simply said, "Patience is something leaders must never lose." The manager's face tightened. She didn't like being spoken to this way, especially by someone she believed to be unimportant. Her pride rose, and she felt her authority being questioned. She glanced around, noticing the eyes of others on her, and her tone grew even sharper. "You think you're clever, don't you? Coming here, speaking in riddles," she said. "Well, let me make something clear. This is my floor. I run it my way. And if I decide you don't belong, then you don't belong." The man gave her a gentle smile, one that carried no fear. He could have ended it right there. He could have revealed who he was. But he chose not to, at least, not yet. He wanted to see how far she would go, how deep her arrogance truly ran. The manager's voice cut the air once more. "Leave now," she ordered, "or I'll personally make sure you regret wasting my time." Her words hung in the air like cold steel. The staff nearby looked down, afraid to meet either of their eyes. The moment was uncomfortable, but also unforgettable. Something was about to happen, something that would change the way everyone in that building saw respect, power, and true leadership. And in that quiet, tense moment, the simple-looking man, who held the greatest position in the entire company, waited patiently. He knew the truth was still hidden, but soon it would shine so brightly that no one could deny it. The hallway had grown unusually quiet. The employees who had been pretending to work now leaned a little closer, their eyes flickering between the manager and the simple man. They could sense that something important was about to happen, though none of them truly knew who this man was. The manager, with her arms still crossed, tapped her foot impatiently. She believed she had made her point, but the calmness in the man's eyes unsettled her. She had dealt with many people before, employees, interns, visitors, and almost all had shrunk under her stern tone. But this man was different. He did not flinch. He did not rush to defend himself. Instead, he stood with a quiet dignity that seemed stronger than anger. "Why are you still here?" she demanded. "I told you to leave. Do you think this is a joke?" The man looked around at the watching faces. He could see fear, discomfort, and even sadness in the eyes of the employees. They weren't just watching, they were silently hoping something would change. They had lived too long under voices that demanded more than they gave, under leaders who carried authority but not kindness. He felt the weight of their unspoken wishes. "I am here," he said softly, "because sometimes silence allows truth to be seen." His words puzzled some, but they carried weight. He didn't raise his voice, yet every person nearby heard him clearly. The manager let out a dismissive laugh. "Truth? Don't speak to me about truth. You don't even belong here. You have no idea how this place works." The man gave her a steady look. "I know more about this place than you imagine. Her confidence wavered for the first time. Something in his tone felt different, heavier, almost as if it carried hidden authority. But she quickly brushed away the thought. To her, he was still just a stranger in plain clothes. Enough, she snapped. I've wasted too much time already. Security, she called out, raising her voice. Two guards appeared at the end of the hallway, walking quickly toward them. Employees whispered to one another, their curiosity rising. Some looked worried, unsure what would unfold. The guards approached, but before they could speak, the man lifted his hand slightly. Gentlemen, he said calmly, you don't need to worry. I will take care of this myself. The guards hesitated. His voice was calm, but it carried authority, the kind that made them pause. They looked at one another, uncertain. The manager, growing impatient again, barked at them. Why are you standing there? Remove him. But before the guards could move, the man turned to face the employees gathered around. He took a step forward, his eyes sweeping across the room. For the first time, his voice grew a little stronger, though still steady. I came here today, he began, not as a man of title, but as a man who wanted to see how people treat others when they believe no one important is watching. The words struck the air like a sudden wind. The room grew even quieter. Some employees straightened in their chairs, listening more intently now. The manager frowned, confused. What are you talking about? She demanded. The man turned to her gently. You see me as someone ordinary, someone who doesn't belong. But you never stopped to ask who I truly am. You judged me by my clothes, by my silence, by your assumptions. A ripple of realization passed through a few employees, but the manager still shook her head, refusing to accept it. Do you know who I am? The man asked, his tone calm but carrying weight. She let out a short laugh again, though it sounded nervous this time. You're probably just some outsider who wandered in here. Nothing more. The man smiled, but it was a smile filled with truth, not mockery. I am not an outsider, he said softly. I am the one who leads this corporation. I am the CEO. Gasps filled the hallway. Several employees covered their mouths in shock. Others dropped the files they were holding. The guards froze, staring at him with wide eyes. The silence that followed was so deep that even the hum of the air conditioner seemed louder. The manager blinked, stunned. For a moment, her mind refused to believe what she had just heard. No, no, that's not possible, she stammered. You can't be. The man reached into his pocket and calmly pulled out his identification badge. He held it up for everyone to see. The name and title were clear, Chief Executive Officer. The employees gasped again, this time louder. There was no denying it. The simple man they had thought of as an ordinary visitor was the very leader of the company. The manager's face lost all color. Her arms dropped to her sides, and her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked around desperately, as if hoping someone would tell her this was all a mistake. But no one spoke. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the man who had just revealed his true identity. The CEO put his badge away and looked directly at the manager. His eyes were not filled with anger, but with quiet disappointment. You thought I didn't belong here, he said softly. But it is you who has forgotten what it means to belong. A leader's role is not to judge, not to belittle, but to lift others. Respect is the foundation of any workplace. Without it, success means nothing. The employees felt the weight of his words. Some of them lowered their heads, reflecting on how often they too had judged others too quickly. Others looked at him with admiration, realizing they had just witnessed a lesson they would never forget. The manager finally found her voice, though it trembled. I didn't know. I didn't realize who you were. If I had known. The CEO raised his hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. That is the problem, he said. Respect should not depend on knowing someone's position. True respect is given to every person, whether they hold power or not. His words hung in the air, echoing in the minds of everyone present. The manager lowered her eyes, unable to meet his gaze. She felt the weight of her actions pressing down on her. The CEO then turned to the rest of the staff. His tone softened, but it still carried the same strength. Let this moment remind us all, he said, that titles and appearances do not define worth. Every individual deserves kindness. Every role, no matter how small, contributes to the larger picture. Never forget that. A silence followed, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was the silence of realization, of lessons sinking deep into hearts. The CEO gave one last glance at the employees before turning and walking down the hallway. His steps were steady, and though he left quietly, the echo of his words remained behind like a gentle but powerful storm. For the first time, the office truly understood the meaning of leadership. It wasn't about power, or position, or control. It was about respect, humility, and treating others with dignity. And from that day forward, the story of the simple man who revealed himself as the CEO became a lesson whispered across every corner of the building, a reminder that respect should never be selective, and that true strength is shown in kindness. The news of what had just happened spread across the building faster than the sound of ringing telephones. Employees whispered in the hallways, some still wide-eyed with shock, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The man they thought was just another visitor had revealed himself to be the very leader of the entire corporation, the CEO. For many, it felt like a scene from a story they would never forget. The man had walked among them quietly, unnoticed, judged, and even dismissed. Yet, instead of reacting with pride or anger, he revealed the truth with calmness that carried more power than any loud declaration. As he entered the main conference room, employees gathered slowly, curious and nervous. The manager, who had stood so confidently just moments ago, now followed behind him with lowered eyes and heavy steps. She felt the stares of others on her, and for the first time, her usual pride seemed to dissolve into shame. The CEO sat at the head of the long table. His presence alone was enough to silence the entire room. He did not shout, nor did he need to. His voice, gentle yet firm, commanded attention. I did not come here today to test anyone, he began, looking around the room. But what happened has shown me something important. It has reminded me that leadership is not about titles or corner offices. It is about the way we treat each other when no one is watching. The employees listened closely. His words struck deep because they were true. Many of them had seen how quickly people were judged for their clothes, their background, or their position. And now, that very truth was laid bare before them by the highest leader of the company. He continued, a corporation is not built on profits alone. It is built on respect, trust, and unity. Without these, no amount of success will last. If even one person feels small because of how they are treated, then the entire company suffers. The room remained still. Some employees glanced at one another, realizing how often they had stayed silent when they should have spoken up, how often they had overlooked a colleague in need. The air carried a mixture of regret and hope. The manager shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Her usual confidence had disappeared, replaced by a heavy silence. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and uncertain. I made a mistake, she admitted. I judged without knowing. I let pride guide me instead of respect. The CEO turned to her with calm eyes. Acknowledging a mistake is the first step, he said softly. But it must be followed by change. Every leader, no matter how high or low, has a responsibility to build others, not break them. His words were not meant to humiliate her, but to guide her. Yet they carried a weight that pierced through the entire room. The manager nodded slowly, her face still lowered. For the first time, she felt the true meaning of accountability. The CEO then stood, walking slowly to the center of the room. He looked at the employees gathered around him not as their superior, but as a fellow human being. "Each one of you matters," he said, his voice steady. The receptionist who greets visitors, the intern who carries papers, the cleaner who keeps this place shining, the managers who guide teams, and even I, the CEO, we are all part of one body. If one part is hurt, the whole suffers. If one part is lifted, the whole rises. The employees' hearts swelled as they listened. These were not just words, they were truths they had felt but never spoken aloud. Many nodded quietly, some even wiping away tears they didn't expect. The CEO walked back to his chair and placed his hands on the table. "From today," he said, "let us build a culture where respect is given freely, not based on appearances, not based on titles, but based on humanity. Because at the end of the day, that is what we all share." The silence that followed was filled not with fear but with reflection. The employees felt lighter, as though a new beginning had opened before them. He then addressed the manager once more, though his tone remained steady and fair. "As for you," he said, "your role is not lost. But your responsibility is greater now. You must show, through your actions, that respect and fairness will guide you from this day forward." The manager nodded again, her pride humbled, her heart heavy with the lesson she had just learned. She knew her journey would not be easy, but she also knew she had been given a chance to change. The CEO ended the meeting with a gentle smile. "Let us not remember today as a day of embarrassment," he said, "but as a day of awakening. A day where we choose to become better not just as employees, but as human beings." The room filled with quiet claps, soft at first, then growing louder. It was not the kind of applause given after a presentation, but the kind given after a truth has touched hearts. The sound carried hope, unity, and a new sense of purpose. When the meeting ended, employees walked back to their desks with thoughtful expressions. Some whispered about what had happened, but most were silent, lost in their own reflections. The story of that morning was already spreading beyond the walls of the conference room. People from different floors began to hear about it, and soon, it would reach every corner of the corporation. The CEO returned to his office, but he did not feel proud in a boastful way. Instead, he felt grateful. Grateful that the truth had been revealed in such a way that touched not just one person, but an entire company. He knew that change would take time, but he also knew that seeds had been planted. Seeds of respect, humility, and kindness. Meanwhile, the manager sat quietly at her desk. For the first time in years, she felt small not because someone had made her feel that way, but because she had seen herself clearly. She thought about her actions, about how quickly she had judged, about how easily she had spoken without care. And though shame burned in her heart, she also felt a spark of hope. She knew this could be the beginning of something different if she chose it to be. That afternoon, she stood and walked over to the young staff member she had spoken harshly to earlier. Her steps were hesitant, but her voice, though quiet, was sincere. "I am sorry for the way I spoke to you this morning," she said. "It was wrong, and I will try to do better." The staff member blinked in surprise, not used to hearing such words from her. Slowly, he smiled and nodded. That small exchange was the first sign that the CEO's words had begun to take root. The day moved forward, but the memory of the morning remained. The story of the simple man who revealed himself as the CEO became a living lesson. Employees spoke more softly to one another, managers paused before raising their voices, and even the receptionist greeted visitors with extra warmth. Something had shifted. And though the CEO did not announce his presence with grand speeches or displays of power, his quiet example had done what no policy or rule could ever achieve. It had touched hearts. The story of that morning did not fade away. Instead, it became the heartbeat of the entire corporation. By the next day, almost every employee had heard what had happened, how the simple man who walked quietly through the building turned out to be the CEO himself. People spoke about it at the coffee machine, in the elevators, and even during their lunch breaks. Some told the story with wide eyes of disbelief, while others shared it with a quiet smile, as if it had touched something deep inside them. For the employees, it wasn't just a surprising incident. It was a lesson they carried in their hearts. Many began to realize how often they had overlooked or underestimated someone just because of appearance. They remembered times when they themselves had been judged unfairly, and it made them pause. Now, each person carried a silent promise to treat others with more care and respect. The manager, whose pride had been shaken that morning, became the center of many whispers. Some expected her to resign, others thought she might be removed. But the CEO had given her a chance, an opportunity to change, to rebuild trust, to show what true leadership meant. She felt the weight of that chance every time she walked through the office. At first, employees didn't know how to react to her. They had seen her sharp words and stern looks many times before. But soon, something different began to show. The very next week, she started greeting people by name, something she had never done before. When interns struggled with tasks, she slowed down and explained instead of scolding. And when she made mistakes, she admitted them openly. It wasn't easy for her. Change never is. But slowly, people noticed the difference. And though trust takes time to rebuild, the fact that she was trying made employees soften toward her. Some even began to support her in her efforts, because they, too, had been touched by the lesson of that day. The CEO, on the other hand, continued leading in his own quiet way. He did not boast about what had happened. He did not repeat the story to outsiders. Instead, he allowed the moment to live naturally among his employees, letting it guide their choices. He knew true change does not come from a single speech, but from the daily actions that follow. One morning, about a month later, he walked through the same lobby where his journey as a simple man had started. This time, the receptionist greeted him warmly, not because of his title but because of genuine respect. As he walked down the hallways, he noticed something new: employees held doors for one another, smiles were shared more often, and conversations carried less fear and more kindness. It was small, almost invisible to someone passing by. But to him, it was powerful. The seeds of respect he had planted were beginning to grow. One afternoon, the company held a gathering in the large auditorium. Employees filled the seats, eager to hear from the CEO. He stood on the stage, not with a presentation or a chart of numbers, but with a simple story. "You all know what happened a few weeks ago," he began, his voice calm and steady. "I walked among you, not as the CEO, but as an ordinary man. And in those hours, I saw both kindness and judgment. I saw warmth in some hearts, but also coldness in others. That day taught me something important, not about you, but about all of us as human beings." The room was silent, every ear listening. He continued, "We live in a world where appearances often speak louder than truth. We are quick to decide who belongs and who doesn't, who deserves respect and who doesn't. But real respect cannot be selective. It cannot depend on clothes, titles, or positions. Real respect is a gift we give freely to everyone, because at the core, we are all human." Many employees lowered their heads, reflecting on his words. Some even felt tears prick their eyes, because they knew how often they had forgotten this simple truth. The CEO then smiled softly. "This corporation is not just about business. It is about people. And if we wish to grow, we must first grow in the way we treat each other. Success measured in numbers will fade, but success built on dignity and respect will last forever." The employees broke into applause, not the polite kind, but the heartfelt kind that comes from being moved deeply. The sound filled the auditorium like a wave, echoing across the walls. From that day onward, the culture of the corporation began to shift. New training programs were introduced, not just for skills but for empathy and teamwork. Leaders were encouraged to listen more than they spoke. Employees were reminded daily that their value was not tied only to their performance, but also to their humanity. The manager who had once stood proudly but harshly became one of the strongest voices for kindness in the company. She shared her story openly, telling others how easily pride can blind us, and how important it is to see people for who they are inside. Her humility, once hidden, became her greatest strength. And the CEO, he continued to walk quietly among his people, sometimes dressed simply, sometimes not. No one ever forgot the day he revealed his identity, but more importantly, no one forgot the lesson it carried. Outside the corporation, the story traveled too. Other companies heard about it and spoke of it in their own meetings. It became an example of what leadership truly means, and how respect can transform even the largest organizations. But for the people inside the building, it was more personal. It wasn't just a story about their CEO. It was a story about themselves, about how they had changed, about how they had learned to see differently, about how they had chosen to become better. In the end, the man who walked quietly through the hallways proved something timeless. True leadership is not about wearing the finest suit, sitting in the largest office, or holding the highest title. True leadership is about humility, about respect, and about the courage to show others the value of kindness. Years later, when new employees joined the company, they would hear whispers of the famous story, the day the CEO walked as an ordinary man. Some thought it was just a legend, but those who had lived through it smiled knowingly. They remembered the silence of the hallway, the shock of the revelation, and the warmth of the lesson that followed. And so, the story remained alive, not just as a memory but as a guide. A reminder that no matter who you are or where you stand, respect is the one thing that can never be taken lightly. The simple man had shown them all that greatness is not in being above others, but in walking among them with humility. And in that truth, the corporation found not just success, but something far greater: unity, dignity, and a legacy of kindness that would outlast them all.